Right, well, there's a good start. I'll rob Rishi's notes instead of taking my own. I'm a bit worried by the grading system that we seem to have introduced for today, and I don't know who I'd blame for that, but we'll review it at the end. Huge thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here today. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes or so, and so we'll crack on. 2 months ago, I met a mother and her 3 sons at an RDA group near Crewe. Her 3 sons, all aged under 10, have ADHD. And she really passionately described to me her life as exhausting. She said her boys just bounce off the walls. And I think rather than when I use that figuratively, she meant it very literally. She'd never ridden or had any previous connection with horses at all. And she was understandably apprehensive when a friend suggested taking her boys to the local RDA group. Talking to me, she visibly relaxed when she described the 30-minute RDA session that her boys ride in. She described it as the one time of the week she can feel truly calm, and then there was the bit that nearly moved me to tears when she said, and the impact this has on my boys is tonight I can go home and have dinner with my husband, the one night a week where we get to sit around the table together. That connection with horses has transformed her family life. It's transformed her life, and it's made horses relevant to her when she had no previous connection at all. Riding for the Disabled Association is a pioneer in the therapeutic use of horses, a leader in disability sport, and the only major UK charity to focus specifically on the health and well-being benefits of bringing people and horses together. We support people facing some of the toughest challenges in society, providing opportunities to stay active, enhance physical health and mental well-being, build confidence, and learn new skills. But why is any of that relevant today? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about relevance. Critically, RDA demonstrates that horses have a unique role to play in addressing some of today's societal challenges. And I want to do 3 things in the time we've got together. Explain to you why I think we need to talk about social relevance of horses, horse sport and racing. Share an example from outside of our racing and equestrianism worlds that explains my rationale, and then consider briefly what we might do about it. My basic premise is that whilst we must consider social licence really deeply as we have done today, it's really important that we also consider the relevance of horses and horse sport to a wider public. So, as you've heard, I'm a passionate advocate of horse sport. I hope to convince you of that over the next few minutes or so. I'm a keen amateur event rider, it says in my notes, although not a very good one. I probably meet the test of those recreational riders that James talked about earlier, and I'm definitely getting worse with age. But I'm also a huge racing fan. The thrill of horse sport is simply unrivaled, and that's the thing that brings us together today. But I'm a Londoner by birth, without a horsey family, and my connection with horses came through urban and suburban riding schools. And just as James talked about earlier, it probably goes without saying that those riding schools that inspired my connection with horses, sadly no longer exist. And therefore, I'm really passionate that we talk about equestrianism in all its forms, and particularly for racing today, being accessible. Now, we've already seen some images like these today. The social licence challenge is vitally important, and I want to make that clear in everything I now say about relevance, right? We've got to evaluate equine welfare, demonstrate our love for the horse, consider our practices in the context of wider societal expectations, just as Rowley and the panel brilliantly did before the break. But the social licence debate hitherto has largely been framed around equine welfare, and I'm really pleased today that we've started to change some of that narrative as well. That we've got to demonstrate that relevance, the horse, consider our practices. The point at which this becomes visible, this social licence conversation, to those outside our sector, is largely when evidence of poor practice and horse welfare issues surface, and we're all familiar with these headlines. We're fighting a battle based on countering bad news if we're not careful, and we know the media loves that bad news. In this context, I think we're missing the important conversation, how relevant are horses today? And my worry is that they're less relevant every day, and this is at the heart of why we worry about social licence. The general public are less connected with horses. We've moved a long way from horses being an everyday working animal, particularly in urban environments. Whilst we're all concerned about our different agendas around this room, We're concerned about the numbers of race goers. We're concerned about dressage's role in the Olympics. We're not focused on a bigger relevance picture, which is how the public can connect with horses and how horses are relevant to their lives. Let me put that another way. A welfare-led conversation, I think, can only really happen between interested parties, and that's what we see when some of these news stories come to light. And at one end of the scale, we in this room, with a close affiliation to the active use of horses, are convinced that we're right. We want to tweak some things, and it's really important that we're talking about those, but broadly the use of horses in sport is acceptable and we want to defend it. At the other end of the scale, those who don't think there is an appropriate use of horses, and we've talked about some of those groups today, will never be convinced. And I worry that we're trying to have that conversation between two extremes, and the real battle for me is how we do that relevance in the middle, and that was borne through in some of the data that we've seen earlier. I'm afraid I'll be a data-light presentation in contrast, but one with a few more anecdotes thrown in. So I believe that we've got to show that vast majority of the population that horses could and should be a vital part of their lives and are a great part of our national story. And the middle ground, after all, is where we take our social license from. Relevance is about a connection with the subject. It's for me, or it's important to my life. And to find that relevance, we must be accessible, easy to reach, easy to get hold of. Social relevance means we must find things that are relevant to the wider society and meet them on those terms. One stat coming up. As an example of that, Mind, the mental health charity, quotes survey data that says, and I found this staggering, that mental health has recently overtaken cancer as people's biggest health concern globally. And we know that horses can help. They can be relevant to those needs of society. Prior to joining RDA, and it's been a very rapid 6 months for me since I took on this job, I was an executive director at Historic England, which is the public body that looks after, champions and protects our historic environment. Heritage and history can be a really tough sell for relevance, right? What are all those castles? They're a long way away. They're not for me. Aren't they just houses of rich people? And actually, that's an even more difficult sell when you're competing for dwindling government funding, up against priorities with far more obvious social relevance, health and social care, sport and activity. And at Historic England, we had to prove how heritage was relevant. We needed to show more than it was inherently a good thing that we believed in. We had to articulate that heritage had the potential to impact people's lives. I hope by this point you can roughly see where I'm going with this. That meant ensuring that heritage was accessible to more people and that we recognised what we called everyday heritage, things that surround people in everyday life, the stories of their families and familiar places. We invested in programmes and outreach that could connect with people across England and told the stories of how heritage mattered to their place. If you told me when we started that journey that we would end up with a giant fox on a scooter, leading processions through high streets across England, the culmination of a programme of high street regeneration funded with £92 million from the Treasury, I wouldn't have believed you. But that is what we did, and you can see Farah the fox there on the left of screen. I won't tell you what I said to our Director of Communications when she first showed me the mock-up of Farah the fox. On the right is one of my favourite examples of this. These are some artist drawings on streets in Gloucester. This was engaging people with heritage in their place, showing them what was buried beneath their streets, what was relevant to their lives. And I suppose my challenge to us is to find our relevance through the everyday equivalent of everyday heritage, what is everyday horses. And that will be the gateway to our big race meetings that we've talked about today. So, how do we make horses relevant to wider society? We must recognise that efforts can't just be about racing. A connection with and a passion for horses unites all of us and a much broader public. It's in all of our interests to work together. And thankfully, we're not starting from a blank piece of paper. Of course, I'm going to share a few examples. 2 weeks ago, I was lucky enough to be here at Ascot Racecourse in my role as a trustee of the British Racing School. I spent the day in glorious sunshine. I'm not quite sure what it's like out there today, but it was certainly tipping it down this morning. But it was sunny, with 10 young people from a local school as they experienced a taster day for the Riding a Dream Academy. 100 and a horse before, 100 and a camel, which I couldn't quite connect, and most had never considered being a jockey or working in racing. It was enormously rewarding to see the development of those young people's confidence throughout the day, and one girl in particular stands out to me, who at the beginning of the day wouldn't touch the end of a lead rope with a horse attached to it, and at the end her hand shot up for expressing an interest in career in racing. But the bit I found most uplifting about that was not those 10 individuals, it was the conversation they had about the gossip in school before they came to Ascot that day. It was these were all the people who wanted to come and couldn't. The year below are looking forward to their trip next year. And look at all these pictures we've taken for our social media. As you might imagine, quite a lot of the end of the day was devoted to just that exercise. That small group have been an enormous PR machine for horses and the active use of horses for the last few weeks. And if we're all to be champions of social relevance, then we should acknowledge that education in racing is not only a vehicle for producing our workforce, but it's also a critical part of our relevance footprint. Young people who, whether they take on careers in racing or not, can act as powerful ambassadors for the relevance of horses to people in their communities. I want to introduce you briefly to Aisha. Aisha is 17 years old from Dartford in Kent. She has cerebral palsy and experiences tight muscles for which she regularly sees a physio. Her physio suggested that she try horse riding to loosen her hips, and she was referred for an initial series of 6 sessions at her local RDA group. Again, her family had no previous engagement with horses, apart from a story which I've yet to fully uncover when 2 horses from a nearby field ended up in her front garden, which sounds a pretty intimidating prospect if you don't know one end from the other. What started as therapy for Aisha quickly became much more, growing up the number of sessions to an RDA ride being the weekly fixture in the family calendar. She developed a passion for riding and has recently competed in the RDA National Championships. Critically, her experiences have inspired her to study digital journalism at college so that she could share her story and that of others, demonstrating that she was so much more of her disability. What's critical to us? Of course, what she proves again is that horses are relevant to her life, and she's going to champion their relevance through her college studies. Finally, I want to introduce you to a wonderful place called Charlton Park RDA. Charlton Park RDA is based in Greenwich, South London. They use 3 ponies to run riding sessions for disabled people from local schools throughout the week, rain or shine. Remarkably, their riding arena is in a local authority-owned park, and the horses live in another local authority-owned park across a busy main London street. It's quite the scene, and I want you to, you can't quite get a picture of it from here, but there are London buses trundling past the end of this arena with people looking down on the arena, and there are kids in the local park leaning over the fence to see the horses. Because of their location, they serve an incredibly diverse community. And those people see the power of horses to transform their lives. I was there for their 40th or 50th anniversary celebrations, and I met most of the remarkable volunteers who make that group run. Tens of people, and I asked them all the same question: did you previously have any knowledge of horses at all? Only 2 said to me that they had any prior knowledge of horses. They had all been connected to horses through the power of horses to transform the lives of people they knew and someone like them. If we're looking for places that make the case that horses can be accessible and therefore relevant, Charlton Park RDA is certainly punching above its weight, and there are many other centres like that run by the remarkable 13,000 volunteers who make RDA happen. These groups, and it's like the riding schools that we heard briefly about earlier, and there are many other examples across a range of grassroots organisations, are our strategic assets in ensuring that an active use of horses remains socially relevant. Without providing accessible routes to connection with horses, without supporting people with some of the biggest challenges in society, we aren't relevant. And that's my challenge to us today, which is to think about that broader social relevance of a connection with horses and how it affects us all. In conclusion, we have a common responsibility in my mind to maintain social relevance, as well as the really important conversation that we've had today and continue to have about social license. To maintain social relevance, we must all tell stories that connect people with an active use of horses, as I've tried to do briefly today. and to support those who need that critical access. And I can't emphasise that enough. We know that all of those groups that I've talked about are under pressure, and we've got a collective responsibility to them. My parting question, therefore, is a straightforward one. We represent many of the organisations with a stake in this world. What can your organisation do to maintain social relevance? How can your organisation provide support or enhance what it already does to support access to horses? I truly believe the future of racing depends on that social relevance and providing that access.